Hare Krishna, I am Bhakti Charu Swami. I am one of the sannyasis and GBC members of ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And today I've been asked to speak on how I came to Krishna consciousness. I was in Europe, in Germany, supposedly be studying, and the exposure to the West did me a lot of good, broadened my perspective, and I made many friends there. And many of my friends, especially the Americans, they had a gross misconception that India was a very poor country. And that used to hurt my pride. Like, although when I was in India, I used to think that West was the best, but after going to the West, I started to develop some attachment, some appreciation, some love for my motherland. And when people would say things like, India is poverty-stricken country, in India is so backward, in India people starve to death, and I used to protest quite strongly. And but then I began to realize that although I am uh, trying to my uphold the glories of my country, but how little I knew about my motherland. And that actually made me start to read books about India. And as I started to read those books, I started to develop a deep appreciation for Indian culture, Indian philosophy, which eventually led to India's spiritualism, India's profound spiritual wisdom. And that actually led me eventually to decide to come back to India. Because I began to see the futility of material existence, the futility of materialistic way of life, and the need for spiritual persuasion or spiritual pursuit. And so I decided to come back to India mainly to find a guru, because I decided to take to spiritual life. I wanted to, in simple words, I wanted to just come back to India and go to Himalayas and practice the spiritual culture which will lead to liberation. So although I was quite fixed on that objective, but I was also quite well aware that in order to do that, I needed a guru who would guide me, who would take me by my hand and lead me onto that path. And this way, I came back to India. I remember when I came to India, I thought that as soon as I come back, I'll find a guru and he will lead me to my spiritual life. But, and with that objective, I landed in Delhi, and from Delhi I went straight to Rishikesh. Of course, I stopped in Haridwar for a few days, and then went to Rishikesh. But then I began to become quite disappointed, because I saw that how shallow those so-called sadhus or spiritualists were with their spiritual understanding. Although I did not know what to expect out of them, but at least one thing was quite sure, one thing I became quite aware of, that this is not what I wanted. Like for example, most of them were just smoking ganja and charas and having a free time sitting on the bank of the Ganges, just smoking and wasting their time. I also met, I went to some of the ashrams, I also met other sadhus, but I was thinking, it kind of made me feel that all their pursuits were quite materialistic. They were not really leading to any spiritual objective. Their goal was not set. They themselves did not know what they wanted. Like, for example, when it came to yoga practice, I went to some of the yogashrams there, and when I started to speak to them, I even spent some time staying there with them, but I could see that the objective of yoga, at least what I understood by that time, that the yoga has 8 different objectives, uh, like jam, niyam, asan, pranayam, pratyahar, dhyan, dharan, and samadhi. But I was seeing that they were just stuck with the ashran and at the most some pranayam. But that also was very, very basic pranayams. The pranayam, the objective pranayam of a kumbhaka, holding the thing, holding your prana, holding your breath for hours together, maybe for a long, long time. You hold your breath. But the purpose of pranayam, what I understood already, sorry, what I understood already was to free the mind from the influence of the objects of the mind. The, the material world around us is dragging our consciousness externally. And in order to project our consciousness internally, there is a need to stop the mind from taking the consciousness out to the external reality. But I didn't see that pursuit in them, in their yoga practices. And what to speak of pratyahar? Then comes dhyan, and then ultimate goal of this dhyan was samadhi. So anyway, so that kind of disappointed me, because by reading books I already had some understanding, which I found that they were not aware of or they were not trying to achieve. And so that kind of disappointed me. And anyway, so I traveled around that area for quite some time, spent some time there. And I was planning to go to Badrinath, but I couldn't go all the way to Badrinath because it was already, the winter was about to start. And Badrinath, the road was blocked, and Badrinarayan came down to Joshimath. And so spent some time in Joshimath, and I met some interesting people in those areas, spending some time. And then I also stayed in different ashrams, like Anandamayima's ashram. At one point, I was actually quite decided, sort of, to join Anandamayima's ashram, because at least there I found something that there were some nice people there. That's what attracted me. But eventually I gave up my search, and it was at around that time when I came back to Calcutta at my father's place, and quite disillusioned about my spiritual life, and quite inapt, quite unqualified to pursue the materialistic way of life. When I was in a kind of a dilemma, in a complete confusion and disappointment, I got a book by Srila Prabhupada, by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The book was The Nectar of Devotion. It was the English translation of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Srila Prabhupada translated that into English. And when I started to read that, then everything became so clear. Everything became crystal clear. Prabhupada, practically from the first page, I had two amazing realizations. I would say realizations, because they came with such profound clarity. And those two things was that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. God is a person. Prior to that, I did not have any clear understanding of God. I was pursuing an impersonalistic way of spiritual search, that ultimately it is Brahman, and the goal of life is to merge into that Brahman, and by doing that one becomes free from the material bondage and becomes elevated to the spiritual platform. But Prabhupada made it so clear, just in few words, that God is a person and he is Krishna. Now from my childhood I was attached to Krishna, but nobody ever told me that Krishna is God. I did not have any understanding of God, so there was no consideration that Krishna was God. But Srila Prabhupada made this point so clear that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. God is a person, he is the Supreme Person. He is the Supreme Creator, he is the Supreme Maintainer, and he is taking care of all of us. So he is a person, he is an intelligent being, and he is an individual with an inconceivable ability. And that is how he could do things like that, create something from just by his wish. Just like we are familiar with the concept like God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He just says, let it be, and it is there. And then gradually, of course, I got to know that he just looked at the material nature and the entire creation became manifest. He was lying in the causal ocean, and from his breathing in that causal ocean, the bubbles that are generated, these bubbles, each single bubble is an universe. So much, such inconceivable informations Prabhupada provided. And then I began to realize that liberation is not just merging into a light and being out of this world of suffering. The liberation is meant to lead us to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and enable us to develop a relationship with Him. And from that relationship, due to that relationship, we become elevated from beyond this material nature and enter into the spiritual reality. So all these informations came with such profound clarity that I began to realize that this is what I was looking for. And the next night, I actually had a dream. And I dreamt of Srila Prabhupada. And that was it. Just the sight of Srila Prabhupada. I saw him in a very amazing way. I saw him sitting on a throne. And there was a brilliant light coming out of his body. And just that sight made me realize that finally I found my spiritual master. And then also I was very fortunate, like when I met Srila Prabhupada, he allowed me to stay with him. He gave me a service which actually needed me to enabled me to be close to him. At our first meeting, Srila Prabhupada gave me the service of translating his books into Bengali. And at that time, Srila Prabhupada had about 10,000 followers. to even get close to Srila Prabhupada was difficult, what to speak of being with him. And although I came to his lotus feet quite late, but I had the good fortune of being with him all the time, practically. And eventually Srila Prabhupada made me his secretary for Indian affairs. And this way I had the good fortune of serving him till he left this planet. And one thing, of course, like when I decided to join ISKCON, at the time Srila Prabhupada was in America. So I thought that I would wait till Srila Prabhupada came back to India, and I would then surrender myself to him, thinking that I decided to travel to different places of Krishna's pastimes and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. And the first place I went to was Mayapur. And although Mayapur is our world headquarters, but those days Mayapur was very small. There was just about 50, 60 devotees. All of them were Westerners, and they were young Americans and Europeans. And they all were very inviting. When I went there, they requested me to stay and be with them and at least try it out. And so I thought, as it is, I made up my mind to join Srila Prabhupada's movement, join ISKCON. And now that these devotees were requesting me to stay with them, be a part of the movement already, I said, why not? And without telling anything to anybody, I just went to the barber, shaved my head, and went to the Ganges and threw away my old clothes and put on the Indian dress, the devotee dress, dhoti and kurta. And at that time, I thought that I'll give it a try for 2 months. And if I don't like it, by that time, my hair will grow, and then I can go back home. But since then, these 2 months did not really end. And on the other hand, the more I am getting involved, the more time I'm passing, the more I'm becoming convinced about this wonderful process. And why this is so convincing? Because this not only takes us beyond this material nature, not only enables us to usher into the spiritual world, but it actually takes us to the highest region of the spiritual sky, where one gets an opportunity to develop a loving relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A direct loving relationship with the Lord, like that of a friend, like that of between father and children, or like between lover and beloved. So that is the highest relationship that one can ever achieve with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then even higher than that, developing a relationship, loving relationship with the Lord in friendship, parental and conjugal love, even higher than that is the distribution of that loving relationship, inviting others to come to develop their relationship with the Lord. Make people understand who God is, what is our relationship with Him is like, and how we can develop our relationship with Him. By educating them in this way, then we can bring them to a platform where they can practically develop their relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In simple words, it's very high. It is a very high spiritual achievement to develop the loving relationship with the Lord, but even higher is to distribute this love to others, enabling them to come close to the Lord. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.